Hi, I am Travis Johnston. I'm a Reinhardt graduate, 2005. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and moved back to the area a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago to be exact, and just wanted to be involved with Reinhardt. I love Reinhardt, where I got my education at, and I value what I was able to take from Reinhardt while I was there. I'm also currently running to be a state senator in the District 14 right there, Cherokee, Bartow, and North Cobb. And again, a lot of those things that we talk about on the campaign trail and some of the things that we will be talking about today are things that have come up along the campaign trail. And again, I really appreciate Reinhardt for hosting this event so that we can begin to have, just start having the tough conversations. So I appreciate great dialogue. I appreciate great feedback. I'm looking forward to interacting with you guys on this call.
And yeah, Kanika.
Hi.
I'll lose you on my screen here.
Can you see me?
I can see you now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kanika Whipple. I am a marketing and communications specialist, but I was tapped on the shoulder to participate in these wonderful discussions by Denisha Austin. She and I worked together while during our time at the American Cancer Society, where Cherokee and Douglas and Paulding were some of the areas that I had the pleasure of working in. I am originally from Los Angeles, a graduate of Pepperdine University, and currently a grad student at the University of Southern California in communications. So I'm like Travis said, this is going to be a great conversation, and I'm just pleased to be here.
Let's see. All right. Well, we got about, make sure my timer's on. We still got a few minutes to get going. And so I was going to introduce to the panelists. We have a number of different panelists today. We have Dr. Cheryl Brown, who's a sociology professor. And then we have Jay Duncan, from Director of our Public Safety. We have Sheriff Reynolds, Cherokee County. We have Steve Merrifield. Is that me or y'all? Curiosity. Let's see.
We're too
okay. Chief Ron Applin, who's the Chief of Police for Atlanta City Schools. Let's see. We have the Honorable Wynn Carlin. Let's see if I get this, Magistrate Judge for Cherokee County. And let's see. The infamous Zane Hedge. There you are. I've been looking for you, my friend. Zane Hedge is an alum from Reinhardt and former student body president, now an attorney and focused on criminal laws, my memory serves me. And then we have Megan Hurley as another alumnus, who's a former editor-in-chief of the student newspaper. She's been a journalist and now is an attorney and works for the Georgia Innocence Project, if I got that right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm getting to do this from memory. Wow. And then we have Judah Norman, who is our president of our Dreams group, which is essentially a Black student union on campus. Let's see, who am I leaving out? Let's see. And we have Frank Reynolds, actually a two-time Reinhardt alum, if memory serves me correctly. One of these days, Frank will graduate and do something with himself.
Hey, I just entered into a PhD program, so having one out here again.
There you go. Let's see. So we've got a few minutes before we get going, but kind of Travis and Kanika are going to be our moderators. Do y'all want to explain how y'all want to make this evening run? And then we got a couple minutes before we jump in. Do y'all want to explain how y'all want to make the night run?
Well, yeah, Travis, I'll start and you can just jump in if I'm missing anything. But Travis and I had a good conversation prior to, as we were preparing for this, and what we wanted to do was to have a very organic conversation where people are just, sharing their views and their experiences. We do have about 4 major points of discussion, but really the idea was just to have this kind of be a thoughtful and just a true conversation instead of something that was very regimented. So Travis, am I right about that?
Yes, Kanika's absolutely right. And I think we wanted to shift the conversation more towards police relations and not police brutality, just so that we have an overall engagement of our expectations of law enforcement, as well as non-law enforcement members, our expectations.
Hold on, I left my mask. You guys have any extra masks?
Our expectations towards what's expected as us as citizens towards our law enforcement.
Can I get back to you once my call ends? I have to go upstairs and get my wallet. Can I get back
Let's
to
see.
you?
I'm gonna get Michelle to see if you can mute everybody that's not on the panel. Let's see if we can get that.
Thank you.
And let's see. Now it's got a message. Hold on.
Dr. May, while you're at it, you want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Roberts? I see he's joined the
Oh, he joined us. Oh, good. We also have, as not a panelist today, but one of our participants is Dr. Mark Roberts, our interim president. So he is going to join in and see how we do and ask questions probably and go from there. Yay.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us.
All right, let's see what we're going to do. All right, so I'm going to have Michelle invite everybody, all our attendees to join us. And I'm also going to have her pull up the PowerPoint for us. And we will get tonight's show going. Let's see. There you go. Let's see. If you'll hit the slideshow button, Michelle, and at the top of the screen. All right. Well, I want to begin to welcome everybody to Reinhardt University's We Are Stronger Together, a community dialogue on race. These are a series of listening sessions. My name is Walter May. I'm your Dean of Students here at Reinhardt, and I really appreciate everybody being here as part of these critical conversations about how do we really assess and evaluate our society and how we move forward and developing plans and actions. Let's hit the next slide real quick. So Reinhardt is committed to making meaningful, productive actions towards racial justice on our campus, in our local community, regional and national communities. We recognize the pain and suffering and frustrations our university community has been feeling at these really critical times. We want to offer an opportunity to come together to talk and learn from one another. We also recognize that Reinhardt has often and sometimes failed in our efforts, and that we've created pain and frustration and it caused this pain for our sisters and brothers of color. And we want to acknowledge this hurt. We acknowledge that we've had failings, but we want to be better. And we're going to use these listening sessions to take the first steps to make transitions and for our ability to see what harm, see the harm we've done, but also to make things better. Everybody's voices and contributions are essential as you push forward as a community. We all have meaningful opportunities to respond and take tangible steps together to heal, build allyship, and to take action towards creating a better world and society. Next slide, please. As is part of a series, this is our second one of our series. The first one, we talked about the impact of current events and how racism and inequalities impacted our daily life and our work. This session tonight is on law enforcement, criminal justice, and campus policing. In August, we'll be talking about the Black student experience at Reinhardt. And in September, we'll be talking about steps to dismantle racism. October 26th, we're going to have a panel talking about symbolism and race. And in November 23rd, I'm really excited about a discussion about faith and race. So we have a lot of different topics, and these are all kind of independent topics, but they all flow together. But when we talk about dialogue, I wanted to set the kind of the ground rules and expectations for these sessions. Our dialogue is really about a forum to draw people together from across the community on our campus and off our campus to exchange ideas. I'd say face-to-face, but we're virtual. But we want to share personal stories and experiences. We honestly want to express our perspectives, clarify viewpoints, And our goal is to develop solutions for our community. We want to emphasize that the goal is for listening and deeper understanding. We want to invite discovery. We want people to feel free to express their interests and viewpoints, question and reevaluate their assumptions. We want you to grow in your understanding and to develop ways to decide to act together for common goals. So some of the ground rules, as we go into this, we want to listen deeply. We want to share our airtime. We want to use considerate language. We're responsible for ourselves. We will not blame or shame others. We will appreciate how different we are, and we'll give each other grace. We will lean into discomfort. We want to challenge yourself. We want to accept, other people's viewpoints. We want to respect confidentiality of stories and leave names out. But ultimately, we want you to take care of yourselves through this process. There are campus resources available if you have need of them. We have a really fabulous counseling service in our Student Health Center, and they're available for individual discussions. If you want to delve deeper with worries, concerns, and private and secure setting, you can go to that website there and schedule an individual appointment with our counseling staff. So tonight's topic is law enforcement and criminal justice and campus policing. We have two moderators tonight, Kanika Whipple. She's a marketing executive, strategist, and writer for 19 years in the communication industry. She has been engaged in communication and media relations, corporate communications, event and communication planning, crisis management, cause-related marketing, social media, and website content management. Originally from Los Angeles, she began her career working in public relations agencies, including Sony and Motorola. She has also worked in entertainment and nonprofit sectors. While working with the American Cancer Society, she served as mission delivery manager for Cobb County, Cherokee, and Douglas counties, and as a corporate diversity training officer. She holds a bachelor's degree in public relations from Pepperdine University and is currently pursuing a master's in communication management from the University of Southern California. Good evening, Kanika.
Good evening.
Our next moderator is Travis Johnston. He's a business professional with extensive background in end-to-end process and performance management. In his role as a territory manager, he's developed and managed relationships with key customers, including Walmart, Kroger, Target, and Publix. Travis has attended both East College, and where he also was named the school's most dedicated athlete in 2002, and Reinhardt University, where he played basketball and was a member of the 2003-2004 Conference National Championship team. He graduated with a BS in sociology with a concentration in criminal and environmental science. Travis enjoys working and serving in his community. He has volunteered his time to support mentor youth and families to meet and exceed their case plans. He's a 2009 recipient of the Public Service Award for the Gwinnett Children's Shelter and recognized as outstanding achievements for the public community service as a Cherokee Family Violence Center from 2003 to 2004. Our next slide, we'll jump into our panelists for today. We have a very wonderful group of panelists. I'm just really thrilled that all of them will be part of this. We have Frank Reynolds, Sheriff of Cherokee County, Stephen Merrifield, Chief of Police for the City of Canton, Ron Appling, Chief of Police for Atlantic City Schools, Sal McCure, Chaplain for Rome City Police. We have the Honorable William Carlin, Judge, Cherokee County Magistrate Court, Jay Duncan, a Director of our Public Safety, Zane Hedge, an alumnus and criminal justice attorney, who's also a former student body president. We have Megan Hurley, who's also an alumnus and attorney for the Georgia Innocence Project, and also former editor-in-chief of the Reinhardt student newspaper, the Hiltonian at the time. We have Dr. Cheryl Brown, professor of sociology here at Reinhardt. Judith Norman, who's is a student here at Reinhardt, and also the president of the Dreams Group, which is our Black Student Union. And if he's able to join us, Luis Gonzalez, who's our student body president. I'm now going to turn it over to our two moderators and let them lead the way.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. May. We want to thank everyone for attending tonight's session. As Dr. May noted, the focus of what we're going to be talking about this evening is on why racist incidents continue to happen between law enforcement and people of color, primarily African Americans. As we know, this is really the crux of the protests that have been happening across the country since May. But tonight we wanted to have a thoughtful conversation about police relations in respect to the Reinhardt community, but also the community on a larger scale. I'm missing, I've lost Travis's face for a second. But we wanted to start the conversation about really an emphasis on, as Travis was mentioning earlier, the relationship between law enforcement and the community, with an emphasis on expectation and attitude, not just from the community to law enforcement, but from law enforcement to members of the community. So I know that we have, as Dr. May said, an illustrious group. So we can get started with some of your thoughts on that. And Travis, I don't know if you wanted to add anything before the panel started chiming in.
Yes, and actually Sheriff Reynolds, his computer is frozen, but he can hear. So he may have to log off and get right back on. But first and foremost, so I had the opportunity as a Senate candidate to meet with Sheriff Frank Reynolds and Chief Merrifield of Canton. And to be completely honest, I went in with an open mind. And after speaking to both of those gentlemen for a few hours, we're very lucky to have them. Those are two gentlemen that I believe personally that get it, that understand the struggle and the plight of the community that they serve. And they're truly focused on serving the community. However, outside of our safe haven, which may be Canton or Cherokee County, we may not always have that experience. And that's one of the things that we've talked about during our meeting. But again, I'm excited. I was excited to meet with those group of gentlemen because I truly believe that they get it. Let me get back to my slide here. So I guess we could maybe start the conversation with, and these are just my thoughts. I don't know if people disagree with this, speak up. But again, I'm a young Black man. I'm 40 years old, and I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if race relations between people of color and law enforcement, is it more so about race, or is it more so of a police culture and an attitude that needs to shift? So I'm just curious to you guys to start there. What do you think it is? Do you think it's more about race, or do you think it's more about a police culture or attitude?
I would say it's a
Go right
mixture.
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would say that it's more of a mixture of both, because when you take a country as a whole that was basically built on the premise of racism and add that in with the behavior of a lot of police officers in the justice system, you get a really biased system and almost a dangerous system for people of color, particularly Black people, especially when you consider the fact that historically the law and justice system stems directly from slavery. When the enslaved Black people were freed after the Civil War in 1865, when they started to get released, the government didn't know what to do with the millions of Black people who didn't have jobs, who didn't have homes, who didn't have property. And then came the mass incarceration system, when Black people started getting arrested for the most minimal offenses and started receiving the highest sentences for those offenses, some of which include jaywalking, drug use, and other certain things, speeding. I remember my mom got several speeding tickets, even though she was going 5 miles under the speed limit, and an officer pulled her over and said she was speeding. And when you take that, it's a mixture of both racism and police behavior. It's not really that you can single either of them out.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Travis. The young lady who was just speaking, I think, hit the nail on the head. When you have a culture in law enforcement that is intertwined with personal bias and prejudice, you can't separate the two. And what you'll find is that even law enforcement officers who may not want to participate in that particular system, or who may not believe that they have these certain biases, you'll find that their actions tend to be in contradiction to that desire, simply because of the culture in which they work, as well as the expectations that are placed upon them as officers of the law. I can tell you that in my personal experience, you know, I know a lot of law enforcement officers over here in Douglas County who are fine men and women, and a number of them are good friends of mine. But it doesn't change the fact that when you are in a culture that is naturally suspicious of folks who tend not to look like you, who tend not to act like you, you're gonna have situations that smack of racial bias. I'll tell you, one of my first experiences in the courtroom was one of my first cases. I was really excited. I was a young attorney. I was really nervous. And of course, being an attorney, you're always, of course, allowed on the other side of the bar that's closest to the judge. And my very first court appearance, I was prepared. I was ready. I was wearing my best suit. I made sure that I did everything right. And as soon as I approached the bar, one of the sheriff's deputies, who I now have a relationship with, one of the sheriff's deputies quickly stood up and he put his hand in front of me and said, "Excuse me, sir, attorneys only." And so when you have a situation where the presupposition is this gentleman cannot be a part of this group because I suspect that he may be here for a court case, you know, it's my duty to make sure that he doesn't break the rules, that he doesn't cross the line, that he doesn't go where he's not supposed to go. And it wasn't until I gently corrected him did he realize the mistake that he made. I mean, I don't think he was sitting there thinking, "Oh man, I can't wait for the first black person to walk up here so I can stop them." I don't believe that at all. But what I do believe is that it's so ingrained in either in him as an individual or in him as a part of the law enforcement culture that he couldn't stop himself. He was compelled because he thought that the place he was sworn to protect, namely the judge and the court system, the justice system as a whole, was in danger because this unknown minority was approaching and he didn't know why I was there. So Travis, to the point that the question that you posed, I think that they're intertwined to such a degree that to try to separate them would be doing a disservice to both.
Well, I would also say that we're all products of our larger culture. When my students come to me and say, "Oh, I'm not prejudiced in any way, shape, or form," I'm like, we all are. We all grew up in America, and there's 1,000 ways that we get these messages every single day. And so you're right. I mean, we're a product of the system. When we look at systemic racism, right, it's a system that no matter who fills those slots, it's still the system in action. And it does take the biases and prejudice of some people and maximize them. And it leaves other people very voiceless in that same system, no matter how hard they try to change it. So I think you're right. It's not race or it's not culture, but it's this incredible complex combination of both. And any answers that we come up with are going to have to take both of those levels into account. It's easy through training and education, and I'd like to touch on that later, how we educate those people who go into law enforcement. I think the individual is the easiest part of this to change. The question is, how do we change this system in its totality to shift into where we need it to be today?
Well, you know, racism is something that is taught at home because children are not born with racist ideals. Usually children could not even care whether or not someone's skin is darker or lighter than their own. Racism is something that's taught. It's passed down generationally. You teach your kids racism, and then they teach their kids racism, and then their kids teach their kids racism. And it really just starts at home with teaching them how to see people who are different from you as just people who are different and nothing more than that. You can still coexist, you can still get along, you can still have equality and still be loving, just be loving to people in spite of whatever your differences are. But really, in order to break this cycle, it really just starts at home with teaching your children.
Yeah. Chaplain, I saw that you unmuted a few times. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just, you know, when I think about this, I think about my life, my personal life experiences, both in law enforcement and outside of law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 31 years. I know I look like I'm 31, but I've been in law enforcement for 31 years. You know, and I have a lot of stories that I could tell with negative interactions with police. I have even more stories to tell where there were positive interactions with police officers. And I think we have to be careful not to label the entire group for the actions of a few people. I get it. That there is racism in law enforcement. I'm gonna be honest with you. There is racism in law enforcement. I've seen it as a police officer. I was a trainer at a police academy. One of my students was injured, had to go to the hospital. I'm standing outside the hospital talking to one of my recruits, and his sergeant walks up. He's a white male. I'm a black male, right? He introduced me to this man, and this guy never acknowledged me the entire time. Not a single word. Never looked at me. Never said a word to me. So is there racism in law enforcement? Of course there is. What are the solutions for it? You know, I wish I had the magical answer, but I know part of this has to do with, like you said, it's upbringing. I agree with that. But we're beyond that, because we have people in law enforcement today, they're adults, they've already been through their childhood lives. What's the next thing that we can do? We can train. There are some options out there, some things that we can do to maybe help with that. But it's very complex, and it won't be solved with just one thing. It's a myriad of things. So we have to look at various ways of dealing with this. You know, I think about this with some of the kids that I deal with and some of the issues that we have in our school systems. You know, I hear people all the time say, well, if you do this, this will solve it. No, it's going to take more than that. It's going to be a lot of things that we have to do in order to deal with this issue.
Well, I do have a question for the law enforcement professionals on this call. And I guess my question would be, so just a little bit on the campaign trail, some of the things that I've heard from the community in terms of police relations and in terms of, say, sentencing, for example. And some of the things they've said, well, hey, you know what? If I commit a crime and I'm told that, hey, I get to go in front of a jury of my peers. Well, unfortunately, as people of color, we're never in front of a jury of our peers because the panel doesn't look like us, the jury doesn't look like us, and we don't see cases where, and these are some of their words and mine, but we don't see cases where white men are being sentenced by an all-black jury, but it happens the other way around so many times. And depending on what statistic you read, but as little as 20 to 50% of crimes that are committed by people of color, their sentence is a lot higher for the exact same crime. So my question is, so we talk about training. For the law enforcement professionals, how will training change not only an officer's heart or a man's heart, but how do we get the system to change to where that we are treated equally for the crimes that we commit? And last example that came to mind was, we know what crack cocaine did to the Black community in the 80s and 90s. And disproportionately, Black men and women were taken off of the streets, thrown in jail, and they were given really, really hard sentences. Well, 20 or 30 years later, we have another epidemic, and it's called opioids. Well, some of the feedback that I've gotten, and I kind of tend to agree with, was now that these people don't look like us, now this is an addiction. It's not these people are criminals and we're throwing them in jail. And I think that does something to people's psyche because, again, homes have been destroyed for decades with one drug, but when a different group of people use this exact same drug, it may be in a different form because now it's the teacher's kids, the judge's kids, the attorney's kids, it's everybody's kids, but it's treated so differently now that it's people that doesn't look like us. So again, to the law enforcement professionals, how do we address that?
I'm looking at Mr. Carlin nodding a lot, so if he could chime in too on this one.
Yeah, I'd like to hear Will's comments.
I bet you would, man. Let me be clear. I'm not law enforcement by any means. So I'll let those guys speak to what happens in their houses and the issues that are faced on the street. One of the things you're talking about, Mr. Johnston, is talking about the legislature that's in place, as well as the discretion that prosecutors and judges have when they're making their decisions. We talk about, you mentioned the crack epidemic, at the same time that crack was being punished at a higher minimum sentence. If you're convicted of crack cocaine possession, you had to be sentenced to more time. The judge didn't have discretion. They had to be sentenced to more time than someone possessing the same amount or an amount of cocaine, powder cocaine, where which is seen as a more white drug than the crack cocaine was seen as a black drug. The minimum sentences were different. That is set by the legislature. That is set by the men and women who sit there and say, Judge, you don't have discretion in this case. You have to give a minimum sentence of 10 years, of 15 years. That's part of the issue. Fixing that, I think we can all agree that was baked into the system. Those laws were passed because they were meant to be that way. I think also you have, in the court system, you have judges who can only handle what's in front of them. We can't go out, and I serve as a magistrate judge, so part of my job is to sign bonds, or sign warrants, issue bonds, try to get people out of Frank's house as fast as I can get them out. The ones that can get out and they're safe to get out. We can only deal with what's in front of us. We can't be proactive. I can't, if I look down and I see somebody who I don't think this has been done the right way, I have very little recourse that I can do with that. And I'm not going to, this is certainly not on Sheriff Reynolds' watch by any means, but we have had incidents where deputies have called for warrants where it is clear that there is a problem with how they went about seeking this warrant. They are making inappropriate jokes to me because I look the way I do and I must be okay because I look like this, and they think it's cute. I don't have a lot of discretion to say, well, you don't have probable cause for this if probable cause existed for the warrant. All I can do is then call at the time it was Sheriff Garrison and say, hey, I've got a problem with this deputy because he's out of line and he's saying stuff like this, you need to watch him. That's the closest I can get to it. And that's probably ethically skirting a line. It's going to fall back down to your elected prosecutors and their deputies who are choosing which cases to prosecute and which sentences to seek. I say Miss Hurley on here from the Innocence Project and knows very well you can only plead to something that both sides agree to most times. The prosecutor doesn't offer a deal that fits, then you're going to trial and taking a chance with a jury. And there are a lot of other moving parts to this than the cop on the street who's trying to make a good stop, who's trying to make a good bust, who's trying to make sure they're keeping their community safe. On the front end of that, my only concern, well, I guess goes back to your question, Mr. Johnston, is making sure those officers are trained, those officers are prepared for the situations that are in front of them so that they can use their discretion on the street to decide which way should this go. Should this go into a more severe path where this person is very dangerous and they're legitimately dangerous and I need to absolutely make sure that the community is protected from this person? Or are we going to have officers or deputies like we've seen in the past who just get mad at somebody, whether it's because of their skin color or because they were mouthy or whatever it was, and decide to load up charges and try to just pile things onto somebody? That, of course, would be inappropriate. We need to be on the lookout for that. I've talked a lot. Let me back out of that.
So I do have a question. My question is, how do we change the spirit of fear? And I apologize, I did not introduce myself. My name is Tracy Johnston. I'm also a graduate of Reinhardt, and Travis Johnston happened to be my twin brother. So as a former police officer myself, and I'm not going to say which agency, because obviously, I don't want to throw that agency under the bus, but as a former officer myself, how do you change the spirit of fear? Because, and again, this is my personal belief, I think that we have some good officers out there that are very good at what they do, but as far as the spirit of fear, as a person of color, I have come to recognize that the officers that are out here serving our streets, serving our communities, a lot of times they make bad choices, not because they intend to cause harm on an individual today, they intend to break up a family, they intend to kill someone. A lot of it is they operate on fear of the Black community. How do you change that?
Can I jump in for just a second? As a sociologist, one of the things that we talk about, Tracy, is this idea of attribution theory, that if you are an out-group member, right, the misbehavior of one person is then attributed to the whole out-group. right? Whereas if it's something that an out-group member did really well, I'm a Braves fan. If a Yankee makes a great play, he's great, not the Yankees, as a member of an out-group. So partly what we talk about is this idea of educating what does out-group and in-group mean, right? And how do we reduce the fear of the other? So one of the things that I've been involved with for almost 25 years now is I've created 3 different criminal justice majors in 3 different states at 3 different schools. I worked with the police. I was a crime scene tech. I was in the military. I understand a little bit about the life in uniform. And I wanted to create majors that got the major points, right? So my students take abnormal psychology because they deal with lots of people who have mental illness on the streets. They take victimology, they take family violence courses, they take race, class, and gender courses. Partly is how do you break down that fear? It's often because we don't know that other person, right? That we understand that those walls are broken down by sustained equal interaction. So I've always thought that my job as an educator in criminal justice was to gray up the world of people who wanted to go in that field, because the academy does what the academy does really well. My job is to augment that. But one of the things that I'm starting to talk to a lot of officers about is how do higher ed institutions and academies start to work together? Because the better educated you are and the more you're interacting with folks that are different from yourself, the less scary that they seem. And for a lot of academies, they may only spend 45 minutes out of months studying family violence. Well, those are dynamics I think that they need to look at differently. So I think it's a great question. And how do we start to bridge that training, knowledge, and that fear that those gaps create?
May I also add one thing really quick? So a lot of times when we talk about criminal justice and about, you know, police officers who abuse their power, the topic always comes up that, you know, it's not all police officers, right? And I think that's great that there are actually some police officers who, you know, actually care about issues like this, but it always seems to deviate from the fact that there are bad officers in the justice system. It's like the saying, it's just a few bad apples. When apples rot, they release a chemical that lands on the other apples and causes them to rot as well, which is why they say a few bad apples spoils the whole bunch. When you have a few bad apples or a little, even just a little problem, you have to reform the entire system so that in the future, that problem doesn't turn into something that ends up being unfixable or, you know, you can't amend it. You have to be able to attack what the problem is instead of just focusing on the fact that, you know, there are good parts of the system. It's like, yes, there are good parts of the system and we want to keep those, but what are we going to do to target the parts that need amending and the parts that need fixing and repairing?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I wanted to bring out one of the questions from our chat, and just a little side note, Dr. May has told everyone that those who are listening, they can ask questions via chat, and we did receive one from KY. Her question was, what are good officers doing to speak up against the bad ones? And I think, Judy, you were kind of touching on that.
Can I talk to that for a minute?
Yes, please.
Sorry, computer problems again. For those that can't see me, this is Frank. I think what's not talked about is forgive me by saying this, but the context of not all cops are bad is a negative connotation for law enforcement officers. I mean, you can draw your parallels for other organizations. So just understand that cops call each other cops out on bad behavior before it gets to a point to where it's investigated, and we police our own. And it doesn't always occur, but I've been doing this since 1994, and it's very common that, especially for a young deputy or a young police officer, that their supervisor, their coworker, they're going to say, no, that's not acceptable, and you see that day in and day out. You see it in performance evaluations. And it's really about the culture of that particular organization. So we're kind of lumping all this into, law enforcement. And this is what I was telling Travis when we had the pleasure to meet and ride around is, we have to be careful for labeling, us as a collective group. I mean, it's like saying, University of Georgia did something bad, so what we're going to do is we're going to, take it out on Reinhardt University. So I would just, ask when we have some of this dialogue that we focus on specific examples, because we talk about fear of police officers going into the black neighborhoods. It's not a fear of dealing with somebody that's not looking like them, but my experience, is that our deputies don't want to get complained on. They don't want to, have an accusation made, and they, are fearful in the context of, what's going to be said if I go in there and do my job. And so what do? They, wait for the white person to go in there and come out, and that may be wrong, but that's what occurs in a lot of organizations. And I'm not saying it happens in ours all the time, but again, there's a lot of generalizations. So, and I hope that doesn't come across, any other way than just being completely frank, no pun intended. I hope that makes sense.
If I can go ahead, Frank, sorry.
No, I was just going to say to Sheriff Reynolds and Chief Merrifield, I think you two gentlemen are unique. I think our county is unique. I think the city of Canton is unique. However, and it's kind of what we talked about, what I've experienced in Cherokee County is not what I've experienced as a person of color the 40 years I've been on this planet. So again, that's a great point that no, we should not lump all of our law enforcement professionals in the same boat. But there's also, I think there's a tone and an attitude that needs to be addressed. So for example, so I'm looking at the middle of my screen here, the young lady with glasses on, and I can't see here. And I got Sheriff Frank Reynolds and Chief Merrifield are to the left and the right of her. That young lady represents the front door of an establishment I was walking into a few weeks ago. And I locked eye contact with this law enforcement gentleman. He was a police officer. And as we get closer towards each other, his exact words to me, and I'm going to try to say it the way he said it to me was, "You got something to say to me?" And guys, I put my head down and I kept walking. So I get home and my wife goes, "Well, Travis, why didn't you say anything?" I said, "Well, babe, unfortunately," and I'm in a racial marriage. My wife's white, happens to be white. We got 2 biracial children. But as a person of color, I don't feel like I have that privilege, because the minute I open my mouth, it's his word against mine. I don't know if he's having a bad day, if he's looking to pick a fight, but I should not have to tell that officer that, "Hey, I'm Travis Johnson. I have a college degree. I've never been arrested. I've never been to jail. Actually, I'm running to be a state senator just to be treated with the same level of respect that someone else that doesn't look like me that he encounters." And that was very, 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 very frustrating. But as a person of color, I can tell you, we're numb to that. Those kind of experiences and things happen all the time. And I get it. Our law enforcement, and I tell our Reinhardt kids every time I see those guys, when you see a law enforcement professional, tell them thank you, because they have really, really tough jobs. And I certainly wouldn't want to be charged with doing it. But it just seems like the attitude, there's an attitude, and I don't know if it's stress related, if it's arrogance, if it's cockiness, if it's, I don't want this job, if being overworked. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it just seems like, again, I believe our district, our county is unique in the fact that we have leaders that I wholeheartedly believe get it, but there are a whole lot that don't. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to bring that up, that personal experience.
For those that don't know, Travis took the time to come see me and a couple other people here at the sheriff's office, and we had a great conversation. Travis and I went out and rode around the community together. We had a great time. And I think, at least from my perspective, it's having that relationship and that partnership with your community and knowing who your community members are and being able to have that honest discussion, because Travis, I mean, he threw some hard stuff at me, and but you know what? At the end of the day, man, I think he and I are off to a great friendship and a mutual understanding of where we come from. That to me is something that's lacking, you know, overall in a lot of communities. Is one, the trust. And that's the big word, the trust, built on relationships and partnerships. And I think that's why, you know, our sheriff's office and Chief Merrifield and some others, that look, we're not in the business of, you know, our business doesn't always look pretty, but if we have trust from the people that we serve, then they're going to believe that even if it was a mistake, that it's going to be fixed, and that we're going to get to the bottom of it. But without that trust and having an absence of trust, there's distrust, and it's not Travis' responsibility. It's my responsibility, the head of this organization, to ensure that that trust is moving forward. So, Travis, I just want to say publicly, you know, I really appreciate, you know, you coming to visit us and having that dialogue. It really meant a lot. And, you know, anybody that wants to come ride with us and find out, you know, what it is that we do in our community and to celebrate some of our successes or look at things where we can improve on them, I welcome. But I just, again, thank you.
Thank you for that. I have another quick question from our chat, and this is from Dee. He wants to know, what is the atmosphere like in Canton right now with all of the issues going on? You know, I think she's probably referring to a lot of the protests that are going on in Portland and Seattle and all of that, but she specifically said this is a question for the sheriff. You went on mute, but I'm going to have to ask you to unmute again. So
well,
yeah.
I would have to divert that to my friend, Chief Merrifield. He's
Okay.
the chief of police in the city. We supplement with their forces at times when they need assistance. We are the largest law enforcement agency in the county. We have, you know, 300 and nearly 400 deputies, both in the jail and field operations. But just from my perspective, the vast majority of the quote protesters, and I say quote because, you know, there were small groups, but they're very nice, very well intended. The few times that they came up here, or actually a lot of them are from here, you know, we had some good conversations. They're very, very respectful. And so I would say that is a good thing. What about you, Chief?
Excuse me. Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, we had, and Mr. Johnston was at a couple of our protests. They were all peaceful. Every one of them, they contacted us first to say, hey, this is what we want to do. It's peaceful. We just feel like we need to be out there saying something. We accommodated that. We gave them our cell phone numbers, would pick 2 or 3 of us and say, here's our cell phone number. If you see anybody in here you think you didn't bring with you and you think's creating problems, call us. If you have any of your people, because it was so hot out there, we brought water for them. Some of them brought water to us. We said it's hot out here. If you see any of your people having any kind of issues with heat, here's our cell phone number. Call us up and we'll get people out here. It was, we had absolutely no problems. It was, you know, we certainly recognized their right and certainly recognized the reason they were there. We met with them before and said, believe me, we understand why you're here and we're not on the other side of this. So we had good dialogue, and our main thing, and we told them, was we're going to stay out of your way. We're not going to stand here and be in your way. We're going to be off to the side. But if there's any counter protesters, and quite honestly, I was more concerned about counter protesters than I was about the people that were peacefully there. We didn't have that either, but that's what we were there for, was just to protect the people that were there and make sure everything was safe. I'd also like to say, and I've listened to a lot just in the few minutes we've been going. I hadn't had a lot to say because it's just been a lot of good things coming and I wanted to listen to. But trying to get back to where we first began 30, 40 minutes ago, culture. And my belief, and if you follow me on our Facebook, and I've preached since the day we watched that video from Minneapolis, I've preached this, is It's all about culture, and it starts at the top. When we talk about, I saw some of the questions of how do we encourage officers to come forward when they see something wrong. It comes from the top. It comes from culture. It comes from people knowing, first you hire people and you let them know day one when you hire them, here's our culture. Our culture is we are servants. We have a servant attitude. And we go through a battery of tests to make sure that those are the people that we're going to hire. Some people beat the system. We all know that. Some people beat the system. But we try really hard to do that. And then we start indoctrinating from day one. You know, and we can talk about training, and training is great. A well-trained police officer is what, and educated is what we all want out here. But training only goes so far sometimes when it comes to ethics and when it comes to being a good person. It's hard to train somebody that's already, I think Chief Chaplain said it, someone that's already come to us at 21, 25, 27, 28 years old. It takes more than training on that. It takes indoctrinating, it takes culture. And when we talk about fear of each other, how do you get past that? You get past that by we get out and deal with the community. We get out and go see the community. You know, little things, and people can laugh and say, oh, that's just symbolism, it's a little thing. When we go out and hand popsicles out to the kids, when we go do read with a cop once a month in the schools, that's not symbolism. That's not just something, you know, a lot of people say, well, you just want the kids to be comfortable with police. You know what else I want? I want the police to be comfortable with the people. I want that. Because come on, y'all, when you're out dealing with a small child, there's no race there. It's a small child you're looking at. You're reading to, you're handing a popsicle. And then we build on that to people. So we're just people. And I've gone to church services with our people and just be seen in the community. But obviously we don't have the answers. Lord knows, I wish I did have the answer. But I think it starts with culture, and I think just getting to know people, because once we know each other, we're not that different. We're not that different. We're people. But it's getting out of those police cars and meeting people, meeting children, meeting elders, them knowing us by name. That goes a long way. It doesn't solve everything, but it certainly goes a long way.
And to Chief Merrifield and Sheriff Reynolds' point, so when I spent some time with them and rode with Sheriff Reynolds, I was shocked because I got to be honest with you, I wasn't sure where that was going, but we were in an unmarked car, and I don't know if I can say that, but anyway, we were in an unmarked car, and Sheriff was not in uniform, and people knew him by name, and that actually caught me off guard. So that means he is doing the things that he's talking about. But it also made me think about something else, and I mentioned it to Sheriff Reynolds, is I'm so proud that Canton and Cherokee counties doing that. However, again, as a person of color, if I drive 10 miles this way and 10 miles that way, I don't have that safety net of Frank Reynolds and Steve Merrifield. And not all departments, not all organizations are doing that. How do we get all of these organizations on the same page? Because I got to be honest with you, there are some that are out there that just simply aren't doing that. Because here's what we found, I guess, in research and studies, and I'll share a personal story. When a civilian commits a crime, or a person of color, for example, commits a crime, not only we're going to get charged and sentenced for that crime, we're going to get 20 to 50% harsher penalties for that exact same crime. But when a law enforcement officer commits a crime or takes a life or does something stupid, we find out after the fact, well, they got 95 infractions or 15 infractions, and it just doesn't seem like that our law enforcement professionals are held to the same standard in terms of their punishment for when they do something wrong. Could anyone speak to that or talk about that a little bit? I'm sorry, we got one question in the middle there.
Oh, sorry, me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to add to your question, because, you know, we always talk about, you know, we have to better train the officers and, you know, just teach them how to interact with people. But it also, someone's personality and just their soul, their spirit, just as a human being also factors into it. Because if you're dealing with someone who has biases that if put in position of power, it would be detrimental to certain groups of people, there should be like certain requirements as to what kind of people should become police officers. If you're sensitive, if you have certain biases when it comes to race, religion, sexuality, etc. If you are quick to pull a weapon, if somebody says the least offensive thing to you, if you have that level of sensitivity, you shouldn't really be considered for that position, since you're dealing with a situation where you're going to be carrying a weapon and trying to protect the safety of the public against people who could harm the public. And it just seems like the wrong kind of people with the wrong kind of spirits, with almost satanic spirits, are getting let into these positions and are allowed to become police officers. And then when it comes up that they have 45 counts of harming someone because of the color of their skin, nothing is done about it. So I feel like, what kind of systemic changes are there going to be other than just training them to like the people? Because you are dealing with individuals who just in their hearts don't like individuals that are different from them, and those are the very same people who are police officers right now. So what kind of systemic changes in that regard are there going to be?
Very good. Tracy, go ahead. I'm sorry, sir.
Well, part of that is the same way a college, a university, the same way that we go out and we recruit our student athletes, it's also just as important, in my opinion, to make sure that we go out and we diversify our law enforcement agencies. It is important for people of color, to be a part of those agencies. I think that is just as important. The other part of that is we really have to be mindful of the communities that we serve. That is very important. The other thing is, and again, this is just my opinion, when you take a person that's never been in a position of authority and then you give them that authority, especially if they've never had it, a lot of times they don't know how to deal with that authority. So I believe a young lady said in the very beginning, all of the diversity training in the world means nothing if ethically, you're just not set up to do the right things, especially when nobody's watching.
Yes, sir. So I'll start with the answer. One with the young lady is we do pretty intensive psychological training, and our psychiatrist identifies personality traits with an individual, and they have a parameter of whether they're within the realm of what we're doing. And so there's a lot of testing for our agency, and to Travis's point is maybe some standardization throughout the state when it comes to policies and procedures. We're a Triple Crown accredited agency, one of 38 in the nation to have that through a sheriff's office. You've got the Georgia Chiefs of Police certification. You've got CALIA, which is accreditation on law enforcement. You've got a wide variety of them. So when you have those accreditations, those are standards, national standards or state standards that say you meet these criteria that are universally accepted. But the problem is there are a lot of police departments and sheriff's offices that don't have policies and procedures, or have very minimal policies and procedures, or don't subscribe to accreditations and national and state standards. And so when you have those, what happens is, hey, I know so-and-so's a good kid. His mom and daddy are good, so let's bring him on and make a cop out of him. And those are things that you've seen in the past. But as we move forward, if a city says, hey, we want to have a police department, I think there should be some standards to say that if you're going to have a charter as a police department or a sheriff's office, that you have to have policies and procedures. They have to be of a state or a national accreditation, and there has to be accountability other than just, quote, a good old boy system. And those standards have to be annually reviewed. Ours are, I know the chiefs are, and then what he said was the culture. Fortunately for me, most of our employees that want to become deputies have to start in the jail. And so they spend about 2 years in the jail environment. And a lot of those traits that are maybe not conducive to this line of work are identified. And before they ever get out on the street, they're in a controlled environment. If they show those traits, then they're terminated. And we have no problem calling another agency that's looking at hiring this person and said, no, this is what they did. Whereas before, and I'll freely admit this, in our profession, where they would get glowing remarks from the police department that are leaving because they're trying to get rid of them. Oh yeah, they're great, they're wonderful. Yeah, I would hire them in a second. And all of a sudden, there's somebody else's problem and not your problem anymore. The problem is negligent hiring and negligent firing, negligent retention, all those things. And so my job, and I know the chief's job, Chief Chaplain, is to minimize that risk. One, it's tough to find people that want to get in this profession for the right reasons and stay in this profession so they have a long, healthy career, and not just having to retain somebody because you have to fill vacancies. So there are things that are being addressed, but I think part of that solution is having some statewide standards, if not national standards.
If I might interject for just a second, because I do want to address Travis's question. I think one of the things that we need to discuss concerns the actual legal side of this entire equation. So one of the issues, in my estimation, and of course I would leave it to my other colleagues here to argue one way or the other, but I believe one of the issues is that the legal standard for holding law enforcement legally accountable is much higher than your average citizen. And so because that standard is much higher, and if you know anything about the law, it's a bit more nebulous, it makes it a little harder to prove. And so when you have law enforcement officers who may engage in bad behavior, the way that the standard is set up is that their ability to be held accountable for their actions is very difficult. Now, I've heard arguments from law enforcement and from law enforcement supporters that if we lower the standard to that of a normal citizen, then what you're going to find is that law enforcement officers are going to be chilled to the point that they can't do their job and they can't do it properly. I think the problem with that argument, though, is that it underestimates the power of our justice system and it underestimates the integrity of the folks who are going to be making those decisions. And so if you have a standard whereby a certain group of people it's much harder to prove whether they've done something wrong, it's much harder to hold them culpable for their behavior, then you're going to continue to have what is at the very least perceived to be an unfair advantage when it comes to being held accountable. In my estimation, I think that until we get to a point where law enforcement officers, number one, are treated as citizens who are doing a job and of course are held to the same standards if they do their job poorly, you're going to continue to have situations where when a law enforcement officer does something wrong or does something that's perceived to be wrong, you're not even going to have the opportunity to determine whether they in fact actually were legally culpable. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, because that doesn't even allow our justice system to do what it's supposed to do, which is to determine whether there was in fact any legal culpability.
Yeah. And Megan, I saw you unmute. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree and add to that point. The doctrine of qualified immunity honestly makes it virtually impossible in many or most places to hold bad state actors accountable for their actions. And that doctrine applies to more than just law enforcement officers, but we're also talking about prosecutors here. And one thing I really hate that we don't have a district attorney or an assistant district attorney here on this panel, but we're talking a lot about the actions of law enforcement here, which I think is an important part of this conversation. But I would also just put out there that the role of prosecutors in this conversation is very, very pivotal. And in fact, going back to some of the first questions that were brought up on this call about discretion and sentencing, we talked about jury selection. it's not actually going to be the law enforcement official in the courtroom who is making those decisions or advocating one way or the other. Those are decisions that come back to prosecutors. And oftentimes prosecutors are, of course, working in tandem with local law enforcement officers. But that power dynamic usually tends to be that the prosecutor is calling the shots when it comes to a lot of these issues. So I think that to answer Travis's question, the doctrine of qualified immunity really does prevent, accountability for a lot of these bad actors. And I think that I think we're seeing a movement in the direction of at least watering that doctrine down such that at least in the most egregious of situations, we're able to hold these people accountable. But I think until that happens, it will continue to be very, very difficult to do so.
And I'm sorry, really quick, if I could just make one more point, following up to what Megan just said, and something that Chief Merrifield and Chief Reynolds said earlier. When you're talking about bridging these gaps, when you're talking about addressing these sorts of cultural issues, one of the things that needs to happen is folks need to spend time with folks that are not like them. And I don't mean necessarily, and this is with all due respect to both chiefs, because one of the things that I'm proud of over here in Douglas County is our chief is doing very similar work. But one of the things that needs to happen is you got to spend more time with folks that don't look like you when it's not a part or mandated by your job. And what I mean by that is if your circle of friends looks a particular way, whether you're talking about, a bunch of white guys, a bunch of black women, whatever the situation is, if your circle of friends looks a particular way, you're less likely to spend time with folks who don't look like that because, of course, they're different from you. And if you don't spend time with those kinds of folks, then you're not going to be able to create this opportunity to learn something maybe you don't know or to understand differences in culture. One of the things that I'm most proud about over here from the Sheriff's Office in Douglas County is that they do a lot of what you all do, which is go out and spend time, give out ice cream, spend time with the community. But when they're not on the clock, they do a lot of that sort of thing too. And until we get to a point where we as a society are comfortable associating with folks on an ongoing basis who don't look like us, who don't do the same things that we do, who don't spend time in the same places that we do, what you're going to find, unfortunately, is that we will continue to put up these many barriers that stop us from getting to know these people. If you're a middle-aged white guy, for example, and you want to get close to the black male community, well, the question is, how many black barbershops are you hanging out at, right? Or if you are a middle-aged black guy who wants to get in contact and have a better relationship with middle-aged white men in the community, well, how much time are you spending at golf courses, for example? And so until we are willing to put ourselves in those positions that are intentionally uncomfortable, where we are not in control, where we are not the folks who get to call the shots, whether socially, professionally, or otherwise, we're going to continue to have these problems, even if we have the most earnest and altruistic desire for those problems to go away.
One other thing to add to Megan's point and the gentleman who just spoke, Mr. Hedge, I wanted to add to the fact that, you also have to, in order to get to that point of, going and stepping outside your boundaries and hanging out with people who don't look like you, in order to know where you're going with that, you have to first look at how it started. How did the justice system start? Well, we know that law enforcement and mass incarceration almost directly stems from slavery. I've seen a couple people point out the fact that the badge of a lot of officers, the shape of the badge matches the badge worn by individuals who were hired to take freed slaves and Blacks who were born free back to the South and back into slavery. They have the same exact badge shape. And so I feel like where that comes, when you know the kind of roots that this system is coming from, you kind of have a better grasp of how to go about fixing it for future interactions.
And can I
well, I'd like my go ahead, Charles.
No, thank you, Jada, for that. But I've just been watching and reading faces here, and I want to pick on somebody here because he has something to say, and I need to hear from him. Nicholas Johnson.
You were reading my mind.
Can you please chime in on some of your thoughts here of what you've heard? Because we'd love to hear from you, man.
I agree with a lot of everything's being spoken. I do kind of have to play a little bit of the devil's advocate and not put all of the blame on the police department, the law enforcement. I definitely do believe that there's a lot of systemic racism, but in terms of the point that you made, Jada, most people don't know that badge stems from racism. Most people just see that uniform and then just automatically assume like they're there to mess with me. I agree that you need to get out and that you need to, you know, I would say that law enforcement, or at least cops, should make the initiative because they're there to serve and protect. As Chief Merrifield said earlier, we're servants of the law. But also citizens need to not necessarily, I understand that, you know, like it's innate that you're like, oh my God, like every time I get pulled over, even if a light's hit, I'm like, my heart starts racing. But at the same time, like prejudices, you have prejudice because it keeps you safe just a little bit. Everybody has a little innate sense of prejudice. It keeps you safe. But Mr. Hedges is right that you have to get out and that you have to put yourself in places that make you intentionally uncomfortable, that you not necessarily may have to live, but speak to people that you don't want to speak to. Spark up conversation so that you can understand and that they can understand that you don't mean them any harm. I don't think that people are, and I do agree, and I do agree with Sheriff Reynolds that there are probably a lot of psych evaluations gone in, but they're not across the board. It's not a law that, you know, that every single county department, sheriff's department has to go through these strict rules in order to be a cop, that they're picking from the cream of the crop. That a lot of these people, and let's single these out, let's not bring it into a whole. You see a lot of individuals that are doing these acts over and over and over. That they're looking, those specific departments are choosing to look the other way due to that whole good old boy system. Not everybody's out here doing that. I've had countless interactions with police officers that could have gone the completely wrong way, but they chose to take the better route. They chose to be like, okay, look, he's a person too. He may just be trying to get home. Not, oh, he's up to no good. So I agree on both sides. I don't think it's all innate. I don't think it's all immoral or unethical that people are just out, that most of law officials are out here just to get you. And let's also not put all the blame on all law enforcement, because like Ms. Hurley said earlier, there are a lot of, I know it starts from the top, but there are a lot of prosecutors and DAs and assistant DAs that are out here just to get you because they're looking for some numbers, not looking to further the fact of whether or not, like, oh, you actually might have a family to go home to.
And to Nick's point, I just want to share a quick story about trust. And thank you for sharing that, Nick, because it made me think of this story. And again, to Nick's point, I think Nick is absolutely dead on. We can't just put the onus on our law enforcement. As a community, people of color, everybody, doesn't matter who you are, we have to conduct ourselves in a manner that's positive and respectful. So that we can engage our law enforcement. But real quick, so I'm going to tell you guys this story, and I think I shared it with the sheriff and the chief here. So I'm leaving the gym one night about 10 years ago, Lifetime Fitness. I'm leaving the gym one night, and I'm driving in my car, and I get followed for about 5 minutes, and I'm wondering if this police car is going to pull me over or if they're going to go about their business. Well, I finally get pulled over. The officer comes to my car, and he says, well, hey, man, have you been drinking? You're swerving all over the road. And I said, well, actually, I've been watching you follow me for the last 5 minutes, wondering if you want to pull me over or, you know, go about your business. And to answer your question, I don't even consume alcohol. Well, where are you coming from? Well, I'm coming from the gym, and actually, I'm leaving to get married tomorrow. I can't sleep, so I figured I'd go to a 24-hour gym and get a quick workout. Well, where do you work? Where did you get this car? And at that point, I was not asked for my license, registration, or insurance. And I said, well, hey, man, to be honest with you, it's 1:30 in the morning, but based on the questions you're asking me, I'm no longer comfortable. So I have my phone in my hand, officer. I'm dialing 911, and I will not get out of this car until another officer is present. So he goes, well, I need to search your car. And I said, you may search my car, but you're not going to do it by yourself. Because again, based on the questions that you were asking me, I automatically went to, maybe he's looking for drugs. I don't do drugs. I don't sell drugs. I don't associate with anybody who does. But in my mind, if you find something, you brought it with you because you certainly don't have anything in my car. So anyways, the other officer gets there and he comes out and we're standing behind my car. And I said, well, why did you pull me over again? He goes, well, you have a tail light that's out. And mind you, I'm in a $70,000+ BMW. And I look at it and I go, excuse me? But we're standing at the back of my car. We're looking at it. Well, you know what? While you two kind gentlemen are here, let me go ahead and put my foot on the brake and the tail lights and let's figure out which one it is so I can get this address. So I go and I do that and I come back and I said, now which one was out again? Because you told me you pulled me over for a tail light. And before he could answer, I said, neither one of them. This car tells me pretty much if it has a headache. So at least if you're going to tell me something that makes sense. So at this point I said, well, hey, here's my license and registration, because it's now been 40 minutes and you hadn't even asked for it. And I handed him my license, registration, and concealed weapons permit, although I did not have a weapon on me at the time. The officer turns back. I didn't ask you for that. And I went to reach for it, and he flipped it into my chest, and it hit the ground. Long story short, I go and I file a complaint with this county. And I said, listen, I was pulled over. Was there audio for that traffic stop? And he says, that's my question for him. And he says, yes, there was. I said, well, I don't like how I was treated on the side of the road here. Can you listen to that? Here's my card, and don't call me back until you've listened to that. And after numerous phone calls, text messages, emails, he wouldn't return my calls. So I go back up there and I said, hey, Chief, I'm back. Have you had a chance to listen to the audio on that traffic stop? Because in addition to that, he told me that Travis Johnson, according to the report, I was rude, I was confrontational, I swore at the officer. And this is what he told, I mean, he turned the computer screen around and showed it to me. I would have no way of knowing this. And I said, you can't have the right person. I said, well, did you hear any of those things in the traffic stop about Travis Johnson? And he said, no. I said, not even a little bit? He says, no. He said, actually, I thought you were quite polite. I said, really? I said, well, what about the things I described with the officer and how he was confrontational? He was trying to bait me and he was just totally unprofessional. Did you hear any of that? And his exact words to me, well, there's an opportunity for training. And I had to stop that, Chief. And I said, I got to be honest with you. That right there is why people that look like me lose trust in you, because here it is. This officer has fabricated a report. And I only know that because you told me things that I didn't do. You confirmed that I didn't do those things. And then you tell me this is a training issue. Well, training and lying are two different things. So again, I don't know a black male alive that has not experienced something of the nature, but I'm darn sure thankful you pulled over Travis Johnson and not Travis Johnson's cousin that has a temper, because that would have escalated and it could have turned into one of these cases we see on TV. So can one of our law enforcement officers, can we talk about trust and what are we doing here in terms of trying to get, what are you guys specifically doing as agencies? And I get it. Cherokee, Canton and Cherokee County may be doing those things, but are you guys reaching out to other agencies? Because the trust with law enforcement has been broken, and I don't think we did that. So I just want to hear you guys' thoughts on that. And sorry for rambling. Let me mute for a minute.
Well, Travis, great point. You know, Canton used to be a small town. I moved here in 1982, and my dad grew up here, but I tell you what I did the other day, and that happens pretty regularly. Of course, I'm the sheriff, and I typically don't go out and stop cars, but when I do, it's always interesting. So I'm traveling up 575 the other day. Don't worry, Chief Merrifield, it was in Holly Springs. This young man flies up on me, and he's doing an estimated 90 to 100 miles an hour. And he gets right up on my tail, and I see him divert over into the next lane, and then there's a merge coming together with the on-ramp, and he tries to go into the emergency lane. At this point, he's doing 100 miles an hour. And I stop him. The young black male, 21 years old. And I motioned to him. I said, come on back here. Because I wanted to talk to him. I want to see his body language. He was nervous. Nervous for a few things. One, he's running 100 miles an hour. And probably nervous because of the current climate. So, but I made the determination well before, as I always do, is, you know, how I'm going to handle it. So I get his license. I talk to him. Very respectful young man. Sir, go back now. I'll be with you in a minute. So So I run his license. He's fine. I go up to the passenger car. I said, you still live with your mom and dad? Yes, sir. Get your mom on the phone. And so he gets on the phone. His mama, you know, I've been stopped. Here you go. And I explained the situation to her. I said, ma'am, your son's not getting the ticket, but I need you to handle this before I have to handle it, because I've pulled too many injured and dead kids out of cars for driving too fast. And the reason I share that story to you is it used to be in small towns you could do that. I've never met this young man, don't know anything about him, but I do this from time to time. And so somewhere along the way, you know, we've lost track of what we're trying to accomplish. And there's the spirit of the law and there's the letter of the law. And I think what we have to do is instill in that culture is, why are you doing what you're doing as a police officer? Your job is to stop the behavior from reoccurring or occurring at that time. If you can achieve that goal through your discretion, sometimes somebody needs a ticket, sometimes somebody needs to go to jail, sometimes it can be handled in other forms. And so that's, I think, well, you know, part of that question, Travis, is, you know, we got to create a culture of independent free thinkers that are not out there self-dispatching in the sense of, you know, I'm patting my ego by how many tickets I can write or how many people I can do. And I've seen that, and I've probably participated in, you know, in those events. I'm in a position now to where I can change that culture, because I've seen, you know, I've been led by some good folks, but I just wanted to share that with you. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but we can certainly do better. And I think it starts with those relationships.
Yes, thank you for that. I wanted to bring our attention to another question that was brought up in our chat from Alex Lee. And they would like to know, can we comment on police unionization, if I can say that word, as it relates to local and national politics, as well as the protection it affords individual officers in the face of the public, and the effect that has on how officers are reprimanded and the consequences that they face? I know that was a lot to chew on, but I see Merrifield, could you take that one for us, please?
Yes, ma'am. Some people get that confused because of some of the things we see in other states. There's no unionization of law enforcement. It's not legal. There's no bargaining. They have no bargaining power. There's Fraternal Order of Police. There's a couple of organizations, but they have no bargaining power. In other words, they don't get involved in discipline. They don't get involved in hiring. They don't get involved in firing. That's not true in a lot of states. And I think we see that in a lot of issues because, and I'm not speaking, I'm from the South. Unions aren't a big thing here. I know up north, unions are a big thing, and you'll get into a fight over talking about unions. But I will say, my opinion is that I would be very uncomfortable as a police administrator knowing I had to deal with a union because someone needed to be reprimanded or somebody needed to be fired. And I have to wonder if, when we look at some of these cases that we're seeing now, where we're seeing this person had 20 complaints, this, had that, I would have to believe that union had something to do with that. So we don't have it here, and we get that question a lot about, well, what about the unions? Thank goodness we don't have it. I hope we never do have it. And I would like to touch on one thing too, and it gets back to Mr. Johnston's point about trust and being universal, and gets back to what the sheriff said. One thing I think if you heard this tonight, one thing that ought to outrage you as a citizen is that there's no consistency, as the sheriff said, with accreditation and certification for to be state certified as an agency, our agency. To be state certified, we have to have, I don't remember, it's 100 and something standards we have to show through our policies that we're doing and through our practices. I teach this in when we do our Citizens Police Academy, and I talk about it, and people look at me like, well, what's the big deal? Isn't everybody state certified? No. How you could have a police agency and not be state certified? You should be outraged on that. Also, one of the things that bothers me as an administrator is background checks. I hear every once in a while, one of our former officers, I'll hear someone say, you know, I hear they work at such and such. That's odd, because I get notified anytime another internal affairs comes into our department to look at an officer's file. Did I miss that? Were they here to look at their file? No, they didn't come look at the file. They hired a police officer and didn't come look at their former employee's department? That's scary. I will say that the times I heard it, there was nothing wrong with the officer, but that's by the luck. The fact, and I don't want to be driving through it. I, as a white male, don't want to be driving through a jurisdiction. My daughter driving through a jurisdiction at 2 o'clock in the morning where there's a police officer working that nobody has checked before they gave them a badge and a gun. That should be standardized. That should be demanded that a background is done. And accreditation, state certification. If you live in a community that your police department's not state certified, you should be outraged. And I'm off my soapbox.
No, that's perfect. And I know, Mr. Carlin, you wanted to add something to that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm glad to hear Chief Merrifield and Sheriff Reynolds talking about statewide accreditation. That's been a drum for a long time that needs to get beat quite a bit, because we have it's going to come from folks like you talking to legislatures and talking to senators saying this is what we need, because they're going to look to you for that answer. They're not going to look to me, and they're not going to look to some of the folks on this call. They're going to look for leadership from the police. I would like to go back to Tracy Johnston. You had a good question earlier. I don't know that we quite answered it completely. You asked a question about what we can do, what functionally we can do. And there's a question in the chat as well. In my experience, and it's been as a defense attorney, it's been as a judge, it's been as working with the state, you're always going to have some percentage of police officers that are going to do the wrong thing. And that's what we focused on here tonight, is talking about how those can be troublemakers, those can be the bad apples the young lady mentioned, and we need to get those out. You have some police officers who can do the right thing every time. And then you got a group in the middle, they're going to go with who they're with. And those are the ones that make me nervous. Chief Merrifield, I remember you talking about George Floyd and that video and the concern that you had that drew a lot of our attention to the officers who didn't look concerned when they loaded him in the back of the ambulance, and were saying that he didn't have a pulse, and they didn't seem to care. And that's a problem. Those officers that went along with what was going on. Part of that comes back to police oversight, like we've talked about, and I encourage all of our sheriff's office, our police officers, in all of our municipalities here in Cherokee County and anywhere else it might be, to keep an eye on your officers, not just while they're on the clock, but also while they're on social media. Some of the stuff that they're out there posting, I'm on social media a good bit. I see it and it gives me a cringe a little bit, but we have to police that from the inside because of what Ms. Hurley was talking about, qualified immunity. There's only so many things that can be done legally through the judicial system, but there's a lot that can be done internally with the police officer, the police departments and the sheriff's office. I think a lot of what this comes back to is community policing. If you need something to read after we're done here, the difference between broken windows policing and community policing, and something that I think the sheriff's office and certainly the city of Canton have done a great deal of. And one of the reasons they are successful is because they've adopted a community policing focus, and that is to be in the community and to talk and to, as Mr. Hedge mentioned, like be in there and talking to people, so that when people in the community have an issue, whatever that neighborhood may look like, they feel comfortable letting the police know about that issue. I live right here in downtown Canton, right across from our historically black communities in Stumptown. There was certainly a time when nobody was calling the cops out of Stumptown for anything. I see Miss Austin on here. She can tell you the same growing up this way. Because of the steps Canton PD, and this is just because it's in the city of Canton, have taken to increase their visibility, increase the trust that's gone in those communities. You have people in that community now who have no problem that might call the cops to report something that is questionable. Not trying, if it's bad crime, people are going to talk. But if it's something that just needs to be addressed, maybe it's a resource that's needed, the community is more willing to speak to officers as they're coming through town, coming through the neighborhood. And I encourage that to continue. I guess the last thing I want to mention just here while we're talking is we're all here for Reinhardt because we all have some connection to it. I enjoy teaching up that way and making my way up to campus. I know part of my talk with students is what we have a lot of discussions about policing and about the law enforcement process. And I certainly want to just talk about what steps the law enforcement at Reinhardt are adopting to help address some of the things we've talked about here and make sure they have an opportunity to speak to what's going on campus and things that they're going to need from students as well as from community folks like us out here as well.
Well, speaking of Reinhardt, I wanted to make one last comment. Quick story, about 30 seconds. Back in 2006, when I graduated from Reinhardt, I was not only a proud student, I was a proud man. I was a proud Black man because I went to a great school. I made great relationships. Dr. May was one of the first people that my brother and I met, and I was so proud. Fast forward a year later, I'm a young 26-year-old police officer. I got pulled over on the highway, and I wasn't speeding, so I wasn't sure why I was pulled over. Long story short, this lasts for about 40 minutes. The officer had me on the side of the road, never really told me why I'm pulled over, and I'm just sitting here. At one point, he says to me, I need to get out of the car. I got out of the car, and at no point did he ask me for ID. Once it finally got to the place of him asking me for ID, he asked me for permission to go in my wallet, which I did. The moment he opens my wallet, he sees I am a police officer. His first response to me was, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "Sir, do me a favor, call your superior officer." The officer arrives in about 8 minutes. They're talking, and immediately the sergeant comes over and said, "Mr. Johnson, why didn't you just tell my officer that you were an off-duty police officer?" And at that point I got angry because I said, what difference does it make? I said, had I told him that I was an off-duty police officer and provided him with my credentials, would that have given him the opportunity to treat me any differently? So I say that to say that our law enforcement agencies, they have to understand the same way that there is a little bit of a biasness towards them. Well, and for some, there is a fear of people of color. Well, they also have to be mindful that because of things like this, people of color also have a fear of law enforcement. And that fear may kind of dictate their actions, but it is very important. And I'm really glad that we have this opportunity because, I said to myself, this is a great standard for us to be able to come together, have important individuals of influence. So now we can take this information, go back into our communities. I live in Southwest Atlanta. So imagine how powerful it's going to be, take all of this information that we talked about today, back to Atlanta, back to Clark Atlanta, Morris Brown, Spelman. So I'm really, really, really thankful for all of you guys today.
Thank you for that. And, we're running out of time. This has been such a wonderful conversation. We wanted to close out by asking the Reverend Dr. McClure. I understand that you are a chaplain for the police department. So we wanted to, if you can tell us how you support the police and your role in that, that would be helpful. I think you're still, there you go.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my role as a chaplain for Rome City Police Department is to actually, get in the car, ride around with maybe a full shift with one of the officers, in which, sometimes I'll select a certain officer, sometimes one of their supervisors will assign me to an officer. I'm just there for, support to help them. A lot of them, they're on a 12-hour shift, so they're in the car, they're alone. There's no one to talk to, sometimes. So just kind of get a feel of their culture, how things are going in their lives. Also, if there's any concerns with issues that they may have, whether it's family, whether it's personal, whether it's social issues, gives them an outlet to talk to as well. Also, I'm able to be like a liaison between the community and the law enforcement community as well. Sometimes I have people in the community voice different concerns. Then, you know, I'm there. I can go to the chief, talk to the chief about what's going on, relay that concern to her, and you know, just different capacities as that as well. So, I did a lot of training. I go to chaplain training as well. So I get to hear from. There's usually about 100 chaplains throughout Georgia that come together. So we talk about a lot of the things for law enforcement community.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes.
And we are almost at time. Travis, I don't know if you had one more thing to add before we closed out for the
Yes, so
evening.
just in closing, thank you guys so much for taking the time to be on this call. And I would personally, and as a group, I'd like to offer a prayer. Thank you for all of our law enforcement professionals that are on this call, because you guys have really, really, really tough jobs during this time. And real quick, and I'll tell you this and let you guys go. And this is how I know that the city of Canton and Cherokee County gets it. I encountered an officer at one of the protests, and we engaged in some dialogue. Well, he reached for his phone. But when he reached for his phone and he hit the button to wake his phone up, I saw a face that I recognized. And you know who it was? It was George Floyd. And he said to me, he said, "Travis, this guy's life meant something to me, and I don't even know him. And I will remember that for the rest of my life." But I truly believe that officer gets it because their leaders get it. So thank you guys for being on this call. Thank you guys for taking the time, and God bless you. And please be safe out there, and thank you for the work that you do for the community.
Thank
Yes.
you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for participating.
Before everyone leaves, could I interject for just a moment?
Oh, yes, please.
First and foremost, I understand that everyone's time is so valuable, and I appreciate that you all invested the time in not only this call, but the Reinhardt students and the Reinhardt community. We truly do appreciate it. You're amazing. And hopefully we can actually continue this conversation. I would greatly appreciate your commitment to continuing this conversation, because I think there's so much that we barely started peeling back the layers of the onion. We have our own Jay Duncan sitting in the corner of my screen. And Jay, I don't know if you want to add anything. I certainly don't want you to feel like we
Sure. Hey, yeah, usually I'm really loud, but when I've got sheriffs and chiefs and state senator candidates, it's hard for me to, really speak up too much. But yeah, I'm the director of public safety, and I think Judge Carlin was getting me to talk a little bit prior before we shut down. But yeah, I think when I was, and again, I'll just take a minute of your time. I'm really thankful to be at Reinhardt, and I saw Nick Johnston on here, and Devontae may have been on here as well. But when I first started here, they came and recruited me in 2016 so I could come to them and start those conversations, because there really had been an issue in the past. And we did some great work together, and I look forward to continuing, hopefully with Dreams and all the other organizations going forward. Our goals are always, education, awareness, and emergency management. That's where we are. We're not necessarily a proactive police department. What my expectation is for our officers is we have 1,200 students on Reinhardt's campus. We need to know every single one. So we're all about community relations, and we're going to be out there meeting everyone and seeing how we can be of assistance, because if you aren't a servant in this business, then you're not going to make it at Reinhardt. So we look forward to seeing everyone come the fall.
And I'll say this before we go. Why is it that Tracy Johnson says he's a better looking Johnson?
Well, we're fraternal.
That's an important question.
We're fraternal.
This is Walter May, and I really appreciate everybody being here tonight, spending your time. This has been very engaging conversation. We've had some great insights from across the board, from lawyers, law enforcement, criminal justice, judges, professors, students, alums, everybody speaking up and having their voices heard is so critical. And I think as we continue on our conversations for the next few, sessions of the next couple months, I want everybody to keep the dialogue going and keep having these thoughts, and also keep voicing the concerns and keep keeping our people accountable. You know, if you see things on campus, you see things that we need to be doing differently, you know, speak up, let us know. You know, we're all in this community together, and we want to make it a better place for everybody.
Yes. And thank you, Dr. May and Dr. Roberts, for this forum. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you all.
No, thank you all for taking the time. It's great to be a part of a university community where everybody can get together and talk about substantive issues. So I appreciate everyone. I know I didn't say very much, but I enjoyed every minute of this. This really makes me very passionate about what we do at Reinhardt and even, you know, more broadly in Cherokee County and the Atlanta metro region. So thank you all.
All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll conclude our call. Good night, everyone. Stay safe and go Reinhardt.
Hey.
Go Eagles.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you guys
Good
so
night.
much.
Walter, talk to you in a moment.
Yep.